In addition to creating a teaching portfolio, another huge part of preparation is preparing for the interview questions. This can be really nerve-wracking because you can sit down at that table and they could ask you anything, right? But the great thing is we have compiled a list of the 25 most common art teacher interview questions so that you can do your due diligence and prepare. Now, I would liken this to preparing for a lesson in your classroom, right? You kind of go through what you want to say, you get all your materials ready. That's what preparing for an interview is like. And you know that if you spend the time prepping for a lesson, your lesson goes way better. So if you spend the time preparing for an interview, that's going to go way better too. Now, will this take time? Yes, it will take a ton of time. It could take hours of time, but that time will be well spent if and when you land your dream job, right? So, although this is going to be sort of arduous and long to go through, I really suggest that you do it. You could answer these questions to a mirror, to your pet, or even to a trusted friend. Whatever makes you feel the most comfortable while you're practicing, I would advocate going for that. A lot of places will tell you to practice with like your partner or somebody in your family, but I find that makes me more nervous than talking to an administrator or a stranger, and so I like to practice in front of the mirror. So do what works for you. I'm gonna go through and highlight a few of these questions, but remember, this is available in your Pro Pack and you can download and read through everything. For each question, we have stated the question and then also some helpful hints for you to think about when you craft your answer, and then a space for you actually to write out your answer. So again, this is an incredible download that will kind of be like a pre-test for you to prepare for. So on page 1, I think there's a really important question I want to highlight that says, what is your classroom management style? Classroom management is something that we know administrators care about, and phrasing this question, or your answer to this question, I should say, in the right way is really important. I personally always like to myself and like to hear others say that they have what I call a proactive classroom management system. So putting things in place to mitigate behaviors before they even crop up is really important to talk about. So you might say something like, I'm so glad you asked that question. Classroom management is a huge focus area for me, and the first thing that I do is really make sure to put some practices in place to stop any unwanted behaviors before they start. So what I do is I have my rules and consequences posted clearly, and I make sure that I'm connecting my student lessons to student background knowledge and student interest, and making really engaging lessons for my learners. So that way they are more likely to be on task and I have less behavior problems to deal with overall. Then beyond that, you can go in and talk about your specific classroom management strategies that you used, but talking about sort of that proactive classroom management plan can be a really good thing for an administrator to hear. On the second page, there's a question that says, a parent comes to you and says that art class doesn't matter. How do you respond, right? And a lot of us really feel threatened by parents who say that. We really feel angry, and those are all valid responses to that question because, of course, art matters. But something that the administrator may be looking for you to say is that first you would listen to the parent, and you would think about if there was anything in the parent's response that you could take into account, even though it might be hard to hear, right? And so that's not an answer that we would naturally jump to, but it's something important to think about. And then of course you could follow up with how you would show the parent that art is important and what advocacy pieces you have in place and things like that. Moving on, there is a question that says, or a statement, describe what a typical class period in your room would look like. If an administrator asks you this question, they're kind of talking about sequencing and how you maybe would scaffold a lesson or move a class through a typical class period. So you're going to want to start at the beginning with greeting your students at the door, having them come in and do some sort of anticipatory set or, bell ringer activity, and how would transitions look and how would you wrap up class. So sort of walking an administrator through a class period so they can get a sense of how you are addressing all those different parts of class will be a good bet for you for that type of question. And then finally, this was a question that I got in one of the interviews that I was in, which the administrator said, describe a time when a lesson wasn't going as planned. What did you do? And for this one, a lot of people feel uncomfortable talking about failure, but I think it's actually really great. So I was really honest and I said, one time, the first time I ever passed back prints in the art room, it meant that every student had 6 or 7 pieces of art and I was trying to pass them back all at the same time to a group of first graders. If you are a seasoned teacher, you probably understand how this ended up. It was not good. I had everybody sit in a circle and I was trying to call names and then have the kids pass the print down to the respective student. And it was just a total nightmare. And so I said, I told that story and I said, what I learned from that is that wasn't going to work. And so I changed my system moving forward, and I had fifth grade helpers come in at lunch and sort all the prints for me. And then while the students were working the next class, I went around and passed the students a little folder of their prints that they could take home at the end of class. And so talking about failure is okay as long as you talk about how you solved the problem, and it will be very impressive to an administrator who's listening to that. So like I said, that was just a few of the questions I wanted to highlight in here, but I really think that you should download this and look through it because there are going to be a lot of things in here that are going to be helpful, and in the helping text, you might find some helpful tips like those I just shared. One other thing I want to mention that is not in the download to think about is if an administrator asks you how you deal with distance learning. That is going to be a hot topic moving forward, I think, and so thinking about how you would teach online and how you would respond to a question like that is going to be important for you to prepare for as well. Now that we have gone through all of these different questions that you might be asked and how to prepare, let's talk about how to research district trends and why that might be important for an interview setting.